Today, in Heroes of Improv, we are absolutely delighted to have as our guest Kenn Adams, who is artistic director of Synergy Theater in Northern California. He also is known around the world for being the creator of the Story Spine, and he has written a book called How to Improvise a Full Length Play: The Art of Spontaneous Theater. So, welcome, Kenn.
Thank you so much, Louise. I'm honored to be here.
I know most people or many people have heard about the story spine, but would you please say what the story spine is and how you came up with such a easy way to do something that's very complicated, which is creating full-length plays by improvisation?
Yeah, I invented the story spine in 1991, and it's a very simple 8-line tool that helps people learn and understand how good stories are put together with a beginning and a middle and an end. So there are 8 sentence starters. You use the sentence starters and you improvise the end of each sentence, and that gives you a model for a good story. Those 8 sentence starters are: once upon a time, every day, but one day, because of that, because of that, because of that, until finally, and ever since then. And I came up with the story spine first, actually, because back in that day, I was teaching a middle school group of students about playwriting. And I came up with the story spine to help them have an outlining tool that they can use to outline their plays. At the same time, I was working with Freestyle Repertory Theater in New York City. They're the New York team for theater sports. And then they were just starting to explore doing long form. Now, back then, this was not really a thing. People were not improvising full length plays. People were
Yes, I've heard that back then people were not improvising full-length plays and that the
doing
theater that you were working
short
at started.
form, using a full length back then to try to do that with Freestyle Repertory Theater. And I started using the story spine as our first way into that.
And your own background, I know you went to NYU in theater. Was it in playwriting?
No, when I went to NYU, I went to the Tisch School of the Arts and I studied writing for musical theater. I
Well,
was there as a book writer and a lyricist. And at that time, that's where I saw my career going.
and little did you know that it would be in creating full length plays. We were talking before we started this interview, and we realized that Synergy Theater has, since pandemic began, had at least 70 online play productions. And they've included things such as pictures in an art gallery that talk to each other, to an upcoming one in which a novelist characters come to life and interfere with his life. How do you use the story spine in so many different kinds of productions?
Well, the idea behind the story spine is that it is the basis for a well-told story. When Synergy Theater teaches how to improvise a full-length play, and we use that method that I write about in that book, How to Improvise a Full-Length Play, the story spine is the starting off point. But in fact, there's a slightly more elaborate version of the story spine that really hits all of the major dramatic landmarks when one is plotting out a play. And we use that as a common understanding of play structure. So it doesn't matter what style we're improvising in or what the story is about. The basic building blocks of beginning, middle, and end are the same, regardless of genre, style, structure, or length. And so we apply that same understanding of dramatic structure to any show that we do.
Now, my understanding from having taken classes with you and having seen your production is that people are not supposed to, the actors, the improvisers are not supposed to come into the play. with a fixed idea of what the story is. So, how does the story evolve? Could you tell us about that? Because I think a lot of people who are interested in this kind of improv think they should have already written the plot.
No, improvisation is improvisation, whether you're improvising a full length play or any type of free form structure or short form or long form, it doesn't matter. You don't want to be off on the side thinking about what should happen next and then coming into the play trying to make that happen. Instead, you want to be off on the side with a clear mind, watching what is happening so that you can enter in a way that builds on the offers that are in the play at the moment. There are lots of ways of doing that. You can build on the offers by simply accepting your partner's offer, but they've endowed themselves as the CEO of an organization. So you walk in and you talk to them as if they're the CEO of the organization. That's one way of accepting your partner's offer and building on it. Another way to do that is to understand the needs of the story. Understand whether you're in the beginning, the middle, and the end, and what the play needs in order to fulfill the role of those sections, and then enter and accept that offer as well.
What about some of the other ways that you've had people develop their plays, looking at endowing the environment or endowing the relationship? Would you talk about those, please, Ken?
Yeah, sure. So I approach this whole thing as the understanding being that improvisation is not the noun. It's not a thing that you do that is a result. Instead, improvisation is the verb. Improvisation is simply a way of creating theater. The same way you can sit down and write a play to create theater, you can also jump on stage and improvise a play to create theater. So the thing we're doing is not improvisation. The thing we're doing is making a play. And the way we're doing it is by improvising it rather than writing. So with that understanding, anything that a playwright does when writing a play, improvisers need to do when they're improvising a play. So that involves creating the environment where the show takes place. And since we often improvise without the benefit of a set or costumes, we need to put that into the dialogue and actions of the character. You need to let the audience know who the characters are. You need to let the audience know what the relationships are, what the conditions of the world are. These are things that any playmaker needs to do, whether you're writing or improvising. When you're improvising, it's more of a challenge, of course, I think, because you need to be doing the job of several theater practices all at once. You need to be acting the role, and just acting is an art and a craft that people spend a lifetime trying to master. But with improvisation, you're also playwriting and directing at the same time. And so you simply need to become as masterful as you can at all of those art forms: playwriting, directing, and acting, and improvising, which is a separate art form unto itself, so that you can improvise a play.
Can you give us an example? Because a lot of people don't think about the importance of endowing the environment. Can you give us an example of a play that resulted from the endowment of an environment, and maybe it went in directions that people would have never imagined when they started?
Um, yes, yes. Well, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll pull from some of the experiences that we've had in our classes. One of the master classes that we teach through Synergy Theater is how to improvise a full-length play. And the students do some wonderful work in that. And we did one play which was set on a private island that was owned by this very wealthy family. And the play began with the characters entering the island and endowing the island, speaking about what the island looked like and what it felt like, the scenery and the sky above. And then we quickly found out that the main character, who was the matriarch of this family who owned the island, didn't want to leave. And the vacation was over. The rest of the family was getting ready to leave, but this main character didn't want to leave. And that happened because she was on the island. So her objective to stay on the island grew out of the fact that they were on the island. As time went on, there was a lot of wonderful work done in which the island itself became endowed as a metaphor for this character's refusal to deal with the realities of her life. Back in the real world, things were falling apart. She didn't want to go back. She didn't want to leave the island and go back to the city where she would have had to have dealt with all of the family relationships that were falling apart and the jobs that were falling apart. So she wanted to stay on the island. So that was the narrative use of the island. But metaphorically, the island became her denial of the real situation of her family. And the more the play referenced the island, the more the improvisers were able to create that metaphor of a place where you are hiding, a place where you're not facing reality. So the plot grew out of the location, but also the overriding metaphor, which used the location as a symbol of the main character's psyche. And at the end, when she left the island, we understood that she was growing past that particular emotional blockade.
I know that now you're doing a lot more work and teaching a lot more work that has to do with metaphor. And I noticed that you were just using an example that had metaphor. Can you say more about the use of metaphor in plays that are improvised?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I will just hasten to point out that there is no difference in the use of metaphor and symbolism and theme in plays that are improvised than in plays that are written. This is simply how plays work. The theater speaks in the language of symbols and metaphors in order to create themes. So a play will have a plot, a narrative, what happens to the characters in the reality of the play. And then plays have themes. And themes are, the way I define it, themes are the thing about life that the playwright believes to be true and wants to impart to the audience. And the way they impart that worldview of theirs to the audience is by writing a plot that illustrates that theme. So if you have a character like Othello who is very jealous, unjustifiably so, and then kills his wife for no good reason, the theme of that play tells us that if you allow jealousy to rule your life, you will come to no good. So when we improvise plays, our plots often illustrate themes, whether we know it or not. And I believe that it is the responsibility of the playmaker, the improviser, to understand that power and to use it importantly, so you don't end up improvising stories that impart worldviews that in fact you don't want to put out there.
You know, you've already said that improvisers who are doing plays have to be able to be the director, you know, the writer, as well as the actor. What would you suggest should be things that a person should do who wants to be in these kinds of plays? What kind of skills? What kind of classes?
Yeah, well, obviously, you have to take improvisation classes and study improvisation. Improvisation is an art form in and of itself. The question then is, what are you going to improvise? So you can learn to improvise and then choose to improvise poetry, or you could choose to improvise dance, or you can choose to improvise painting, or any art form in the world, really. The way we talk about it, we basically mean improvising theater. That's what most of our online community here uses their improvisation towards. So if you are going to learn to improvise with the objective of improvising plays, well, then you would benefit yourself a great deal if you also took acting classes, because acting is a different art form than improvisation. And playwriting classes. Playwriting is a different art form than improvisation. And directing classes. Directing is a different art form than improvisation. If you want to improvise those things, you have to know how to do those things before you have any hope of improvising that. And that's just the beginning. There are people who improvise musicals, yeah, in which case you need to know how to sing, and you need to know how to dance, and you need to know how to write lyrics, and you need to know how to choreograph, so that you're not just going out there and parodying these things, but you're actually going out there and improvising them.
And I think that's something that a lot of people don't realize. They think that all improvisation is chasing laughs, but theatrical improv of the type that you are teaching and that you do, it can be comedic, it can be dramatic, it can be tragic, but it is not chasing laughs. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'm actually not a fan, to be honest, of the phrase dramatic improvisation, because I think when people use that, they are trying to distinguish between short form improvisation, which is usually um, comedic in nature, but not necessarily comedic the way a Neil Simon play might be comedic, but comedic with perhaps more like a sketch, shallow characters that are kind of making jokes about the situation, as opposed to deeper characters that are genuinely living through something important to them. So we use dramatic improvisation. But as you just pointed out, when you set out to improvise a full-length play, there is no difference in the structure of that play or the tools of that play or the artistry that you're going to bring to it as an improviser, actor, director, and playwright. There is no difference between a dramatic play and a comedic play on that level. There are differences. There are ways of approaching those plays in order to have a dramatic effect versus a comedic effect, but that does not involve the structure or the length or the depth of genuine emotions that we allow our characters to feel. All of those things are exactly the same, whether you're doing drama or comedy or melodrama or farce. So, um, I would say that my approach is not an approach for dramatic improvisation any more than it is an approach for comedic improvisation or farcical improvisation. It's simply an approach for improvising a full-length play with characters that are genuinely involved in the lives they're portraying on stage.
Got another question for you, Ken. A lot of people want to support themselves by being professional improvisers. You were one of the rare people who appears to have been able to do that. What are your tips for people who are interested in doing that, especially for people who are interested in doing it in this type of improv that's not the chasing the jokes, games type, sports type of improv?
Well, I have managed to make a career as an improviser because I find satisfaction not only in performing improvisation, but in teaching improvisation as well. And I find a particular satisfaction in teaching improvisation and theater to children. And that is how I've been able to make a living at it. If I cut out all of the teaching that I do, then simply performing in my own theater company shows certainly would not provide the money I need to make a living. So I've been able to do this for 12 years now, I think it's been. I've been solely employed by Synergy Theater. And the majority of that money pre-COVID times came from the work I did doing youth outreach programs, teaching and running after-school drama programs in public schools, and performing a children's improvisational show that I toured around to libraries and community centers and public schools. Then I made money on top of that through teaching adult classes, and then a little bit of fun money from the shows that we've been doing. And that is still basically the formula, even now that we're online. The online classes is the majority of the income because our performances now are for free. We don't even charge anything. We just perform on YouTube for free. The other way that we're bringing in money now is because last year we finally transferred our organization into a 501c3 nonprofit charitable organization. So now like other arts organizations, we're allowed to solicit donations. So donations through fundraising events is another source of income that we have available to us now that we didn't have before. So I guess the short answer to your question is the only way I know how to do it is by running an organization that has education as a major part of its mission. If you just want to go out there as a solo performer and make your living doing this, if anyone knows how, please tell me. I'd love to hear about it. But honestly, I don't know the answer to that.
One last question. Um, I've noticed that dramatic improv, spontaneous theater, however one wants to call it, is not as well known or as popular as other types of improv. Why do you think that is? And what could be done to change that?
Yeah, that's a really wonderful question. I think, to be honest with you, if you took like a cross section of 1,000 people just walking down the street in any major city in the world, they would not know very much about theater at all, let alone improvisational theater. And for those people who do know about improvisational theater, what they do know is maybe they've seen Whose Line Is It Anyway? Or they think that Saturday Night Live has something to do with improv. The truth of the matter is, most people don't really know at all what improvisational theater is. They confuse it with stand-up comedy if they have an inkling of it at all. So for a while, that was just the case. Not a lot of people knew about improv on any level whatsoever. Then Whose Line Is It Anyway came along, and suddenly it became very famous. It became a household word, and everybody knew about improv, but they knew about that kind of improvisation. And that kind of improvisation is very, very sketch-oriented, game-oriented, short form. And that's wonderful. And I love short form. I grew up playing theater sports. That's how I learned to improvise. I love theater sports. I love short form improvisation. I don't think short form improvisation has to be shallow and sketch oriented. I think you can make great theater in a 2-minute scene with real characters.
I even hear that you created a short form game, Sit, Stand, Kneel.
Yes, and I'm proud of that because that has gone on to become quite well known. Whose Line Is It Anyway? In fact, has done it a number of times or some variation of it. So yes, I invented Sit, Stand, and Kneel, that short form game. And like I said, I really love that. I played theater sports for years and I miss it. But the type of long form improvisation that we're talking about, improvising full length plays, it just isn't done that much within the larger improv community. And it's not known through any, television attention or any type of, money-backed, mass-marketed effort that would bring it to a lot of people's attention. So, I don't know what the answer is to combating that. What I do know now from spending a year online is that there are a lot of really smart, talented, wonderful people and theater companies doing this, much more than I knew of. And the art of improvising full-length plays is really a thing now. There are real, smart, talented, professional improvisers who do this and do it consistently and do it well. And that's been wonderful to learn about and wonderful to see.
Well, thank you, Kenn, for everything you've been talking about, for creating the story spine, for being an inspiration even for our soap opera that will start in May, Duluth. So thank you so much. And we've had today Kenn Adams, creator of the story spine, author of How to Improvise Full-Length Plays, the Art of Spontaneous Theater. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.